Dear Starseeds on Gaia, I need you to pause whatever else claims your attention right now, because what I'm about to share with you cannot wait another moment. For 6 days now, you've been walking through a cosmic storm that most of your world cannot see, cannot name, cannot even sense pressing against their skin like electricity before lightning strikes. But you feel it. You've felt every single moment of it since November 9th, when Mercury stationed retrograde in the sign of truth itself, and you thought perhaps you were imagining the intensity of what began to unravel. You weren't imagining anything. What you've been experiencing is the systematic exposure of everything in your life that was built on foundations of sand, wrapped in the comfortable lies you told yourself, or constructed from the borrowed beliefs of others who never knew you at all. But something happened 3 days ago that changed the nature of this exposure entirely. And if you've been feeling like a different person since Tuesday, if you've been catching yourself thinking thoughts that don't sound like your old voice, if you've been seeing your entire life from an angle that wasn't available to you even a week ago, there's a reason for that. The 1111 portal didn't just open on November 11th. It rewired something fundamental in the architecture of your consciousness, and now you're processing the Mercury retrograde revelations through upgraded perceptual equipment. The you from November 8th couldn't have handled what you're seeing now. That version of you would have looked away, made excuses, retreated into comfortable denial. But the you that emerged from the 1111 activation, you can't unsee what's been revealed, and that's precisely what we've been waiting for. I am Seraphine, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, and I've been watching your journey through this Mercury retrograde cycle with particular attention, because this one is different. This isn't just another retrograde asking you to back up your devices and triple-check your texts. Mercury went retrograde in Sagittarius, the sign that governs your beliefs, your philosophies, your entire framework for understanding what's true and what's false, what's possible, and what's merely wishful thinking. For 6 days now, Mercury has been moving backward through the part of your chart that holds the stories you tell yourself about reality itself. And those stories, they're falling apart. They're supposed to fall apart. That's not the crisis. That's the blessing in disguise. What I haven't told you yet is that Mercury isn't operating alone in this exposure process. On the same day the 1111 portal flooded your field with master number frequencies and timeline recalibration codes, Jupiter stationed retrograde as well. Jupiter, the planet of expansion and growth and abundance, began moving backward on the most powerful numerological day of your year. This wasn't coincidence. This was cosmic design. While Mercury exposes the false beliefs in your mental body, Jupiter is simultaneously reviewing every area of your life where you've been trying to expand on foundations that cannot hold the weight of your true destiny. Every business venture built on compromised values. Every relationship that asks you to shrink to make others comfortable. Every dream you've been pursuing because it looked impressive from the outside, not because it resonated with the frequency of your soul's genuine purpose. You're experiencing a double retrograde exposure that's working in perfect synchronization. And the reason it feels so intense right now, the reason you might be questioning everything about your life path in ways you haven't questioned in years, is because you're meant to be questioning. You're supposed to be looking at your life with fresh eyes that see through the illusions your old consciousness agreed to believe. But here's what makes November 14th such a critical juncture in this process, and why I'm transmitting this message to you specifically today. You're standing at the conscious recognition point. You're far enough into this retrograde cycle that patterns have emerged. The disruptions aren't random anymore. The communication breakdowns aren't just technical glitches. The old stories that used to comfort you don't land the same way when you try to tell them to yourself in the mirror. 6 days is long enough to see the pattern. 6 days is long enough to recognize which areas of your life have been systematically dismantled by Mercury's backward motion through your belief systems. But 6 days isn't so long that you've already descended into the darkest part of the cave, which is still waiting for you on November 20th, when Mercury reaches what we call the inferior conjunction, the retrograde's deepest point, the moment when the messenger planet passes directly between Earth and the Sun, and everything stops to reveal the truth that's been hidden underneath all the surface chaos. You haven't reached that point yet. Right now on November 14th, you're in the assessment phase. You're in the moment of conscious choice about how you want to move forward with what's been revealed. Let me tell you what's been exposed in the collective field over these past 6 days, because I want you to understand that what you're experiencing in your personal life is mirroring a massive exposure happening across the entire awakened community. The Taurus full moon on November 5th shook the material foundations of your world. It was a full moon at perigee, meaning it was closer to Earth than usual, meaning its gravitational pull on your emotional body and your relationship to physical security was magnified beyond normal intensity. That full moon asked a specific question. What in your material world, your income, your living situation, your physical health, your tangible resources is actually stable, and what only looks stable because you've been afraid to test its foundations? 9 days later, you have your answer. Whatever got shaken loose by that full moon, whatever instability it revealed in your external circumstances, that's now being processed through the Mercury retrograde lens of what belief systems created this vulnerability in the first place. But there's something else happening beneath the surface of these planetary movements, something that most astrologers won't tell you because they're reading the transits through a three-dimensional framework that can't account for the multi-dimensional shift occurring in real time across your planet. Saturn has been retrograde since June 14th. For 137 days, the planet of structure and limitation and karmic lessons has been moving backward through the part of your chart that governs long-term foundations. Saturn's retrograde is ending in exactly 2 weeks on November 28th, which means these final 14 days represent the completion of a 137-day karmic examination. Whatever Saturn has been teaching you about discipline, about delayed gratification, about the relationship between effort and reward, about the structures that either support your evolution or constrain it, those lessons are reaching their culmination point. Here's why this matters for what's being exposed right now during Mercury retrograde. The short-term revelations of Mercury are revealing the long-term karmic patterns of Saturn. What looks like a random communication breakdown that happened 4 days ago is actually showing you a pattern that Saturn's been trying to get you to see for 4.5 months. What looks like a sudden realization about someone's true character is actually the final piece of evidence in a case that Saturn's been building since summer. The Mercury exposures aren't separate from the Saturn lessons. They're the surface manifestation of deep structural realignments that have been occurring in the architecture of your life since June. And because Jupiter stationed retrograde on the 1111 portal, you now have 3 outer planets in retrograde motion simultaneously: Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn, creating a triple retrograde review of your beliefs. Mercury, your expansion patterns; Jupiter, and your foundational structures, Saturn. This is why everything feels like it's falling apart. This is why you might be questioning not just individual decisions, but the entire trajectory of your life path. 3 different levels of your consciousness are being reviewed simultaneously, and the 1111 portal gave you the upgraded awareness to actually perceive all 3 levels at once, instead of being overwhelmed by confusion. Let me tell you what else I've been observing in the energetic field since November 9th, because this is where the exposure becomes deeply personal, and you need to understand what's actually happening in your own experience. Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius targets your belief systems. Yes, but Sagittarius also governs your relationship to truth itself. Not just what do I believe, but how do I determine what's true? What evidence do I accept? What sources do I trust? What does my intuition tell me, versus what does my conditioning tell me, versus what does my fear tell me? For 6 days, Mercury has been scrambling the signals between these different sources of knowing, and the result is that you've probably noticed yourself questioning things you used to take for granted as obviously true. Maybe you've been seeing repeating numbers everywhere, on clocks, on license plates, in random combinations that keep appearing in your field of vision until you can't dismiss them as coincidence anymore. That's not Mercury retrograde interference. That's confirmation that what's being exposed in your life right now is divinely guided. Those repeating numbers are the universe's way of saying, pay attention to this revelation. This one matters. This is showing you something you need to see. When Mercury goes retrograde, the veils between dimensions thin, and the language of synchronicity becomes more pronounced. The number sequences are breadcrumbs marking the trail through the chaos, pointing you toward the truth that wants to be recognized. Or maybe you've been experiencing dreams that are more vivid, more symbolic, more prophetic than your normal dreaming patterns. That's because Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius opens the channel between your conscious mind and your higher mind. And when your waking consciousness is too busy processing the 3-dimensional disruptions of retrograde chaos, your dream state becomes the delivery system for the deeper messages. If you've been waking up from dreams that feel significant, but whose meaning eludes you in waking consciousness, write them down. The interpretation will become clear once Mercury stations direct on November 29th. But the dream itself is being delivered now because your unconscious mind is already processing information that your conscious mind isn't ready to fully integrate yet. Some of you have been experiencing what feels like grief, like a mourning process for versions of yourself, or relationships or life paths that suddenly seem to belong to someone else's story. That grief is real, and it's valid, and it needs to be honored. But I want you to understand what you're actually grieving. You're not grieving loss. You're grieving exposure. You're mourning the death of illusions that were comforting even as they were limiting. You're saying goodbye to the person you thought you were supposed to become, based on other people's expectations. And that's a death that deserves ritual, deserves tears, deserves the full emotional processing of any significant ending. But on the other side of that grief is the space for your true self to finally breathe without constraint. Others of you aren't feeling grief at all. You're feeling rage. Clean, hot, clarifying rage at the people and systems and situations that you've been tolerating out of some misplaced sense of loyalty or obligation or fear of conflict. Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius has a warrior quality to it, a refusal to compromise on truth just to keep the peace. If you've been feeling anger rising in you over the past 6 days, anger that feels righteous and necessary rather than petty or reactive, that's actually your sovereignty reasserting itself after a long period of suppression. The anger isn't the problem. The anger is the signal that you've been violating your own boundaries, and Mercury has exposed exactly where those violations have been occurring. What I'm about to tell you next is crucial for understanding why November 14th represents such a pivotal moment in this process. You're standing exactly halfway between two massive cosmic events that will define the rest of November's transformation sequence. Behind you by 3 days is the 1111 portal, which upgraded your consciousness and gave you new eyes to see what Mercury is revealing. Ahead of you by 6 days is a triple convergence that will make everything you're experiencing right now look like gentle preparation. The Scorpio new moon on November 20th at the final degree of Scorpio, the degree of ultimate transformation, the degree of complete death and rebirth. Mercury at inferior conjunction on the same day, meaning the retrograde reaches its absolute deepest point, and Uranus at opposition on November 21st, meaning the Great Awakener planet is fully activated and ready to shatter whatever remaining illusions survived the Mercury exposure. November 14th is your last chance to consciously assess what's been revealed before the cosmic intensity increases exponentially. In 3 days on November 17th, the Leonid meteor shower peaks, flooding your field with what we call lion codes, galactic frequencies of courage, sovereignty, and divine authority. Those codes are preparing you for the transformation that's coming on the 20th and 21st. But they can only activate in a consciousness that's already done the work of recognizing what needs to die. That's why today matters. That's why this check-in point is so crucial. You're being asked to take inventory. What has Mercury shown you so far? What patterns have emerged from the chaos? What beliefs have been proven false? What relationships have revealed their true nature? What career paths have shown themselves to be dead ends dressed up as opportunities? Because here's what most people don't understand about Mercury retrograde, and especially about this Mercury retrograde in the sign of truth and higher meaning. The disruptions aren't punishments. The exposures aren't cruelties. Every single thing that's falling apart right now was already broken. Every communication that's broken down was already based on misunderstanding or dishonesty or unspoken resentments. Every technological glitch that's disrupted your plans was redirecting you away from a timeline that wasn't aligned with your highest good. Mercury retrograde doesn't create problems. It reveals problems that were always there but were invisible under the spell of forward momentum and distracted busyness and the comfort of familiar routines. What Mercury retrograde does, and what this particular Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius is doing with exceptional precision, is force you to stop moving forward long enough to actually look at where you've been going. And when you stop and look with the upgraded consciousness that came through the 1111 portal, what you see is that some of the paths you've been walking were leading you away from yourself. Some of the beliefs you've been defending were actually defending your captivity, not your freedom. Some of the people you've been prioritizing were feeding on your energy rather than contributing to your growth. Mercury retrograde strips away the pretty stories we tell ourselves about these things and shows us the raw truth underneath. I know that truth can be devastating. I know that looking at your life with clear eyes after years of rose-colored glasses can feel like waking up in a stranger's house and wondering how you got there. But I want you to understand something about the Galactic Federation's perspective on your current experience. We don't see this as a breakdown. We see this as a breakthrough that's been waiting for you since the moment you incarnated on this planet, with your soul's mission encoded in your cellular memory. Every single thing that's being exposed right now is being exposed because you're finally ready to see it. Your consciousness has evolved to the point where you can handle the truth without being destroyed by it. The you from 5 years ago couldn't have processed these revelations. The you from 5 years ago would have defended the illusions because you needed them for survival. But you don't need them anymore. You've grown strong enough to stand in naked truth. Let me tell you about the specific ways this exposure has been manifesting across different areas of the collective awakening experience, because I want you to recognize your personal experience in the larger pattern. Some of you have had exposures in your romantic relationships. Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, which governs your ninth house of philosophy and belief systems, has revealed fundamental incompatibilities in worldview that you'd been overlooking because the surface chemistry was strong. You've discovered that someone you thought was walking a similar path is actually heading in a completely different direction. Or you've realized that what you thought was healthy independence in a partnership was actually emotional unavailability masquerading as spiritual maturity. These revelations are painful, but they're liberating you from relationships that would have required you to abandon pieces of yourself to maintain them. Others of you have had exposures in your work and career. Jupiter retrograde, which started on the 1111 portal, is reviewing your relationship to expansion and success and abundance. You've suddenly seen clearly that the job you've been grinding away at, hoping it will eventually lead to fulfillment, is actually a trap designed to extract your life force in exchange for barely enough resources to survive. Or you've realized that the business you've been building is based on a model that worked for someone else, but doesn't resonate with your soul's actual purpose. Or you've discovered that the colleagues you trusted have been undermining you behind professional smiles. The exposure isn't the tragedy. The tragedy would have been investing 5 more years in something that was never going to nourish you. Some of you have had exposures around family dynamics and ancestral patterns. Saturn retrograde, which has been active since June and is now approaching its direct station in 2 weeks, has been excavating karmic patterns that run through your family lineage like geological strata. You've seen clearly for the first time how the trauma your grandparents never processed became the emotional inheritance you've been carrying. You've recognized that the role you've been playing in your family system, the peacemaker, the overachiever, the scapegoat, the invisible one, was never your authentic identity. It was a survival strategy you adopted as a child that's now suffocating the adult you're trying to become. These family exposures are often the most painful because they require you to individuate from the collective field that formed your earliest sense of self. But individuation isn't betrayal. It's the completion of your soul's incarnational contract. And some of you have had exposures that are purely internal. Revelations about yourself that don't involve any external relationships or circumstances. Mercury retrograde has shown you the ways you've been lying to yourself about your own motivations, your own fears, your own unexamined biases and shadow patterns. Maybe you've realized that what you thought was discernment was actually judgment born from your own unhealed wounds. Maybe you've seen that what you called setting boundaries was sometimes just control disguised as self-protection. Maybe you've discovered that the spiritual identity you've been constructing, the enlightened one, the awakened one, the one who has it all figured out, was just another ego costume, more subtle than your old ego, but still fundamentally about maintaining a self-image rather than dissolving into authentic presence. These internal exposures are perhaps the most valuable of all, because they're the ones that actually liberate you from the prisons you've been building in your own mind. External circumstances can trap you, yes, but the chains forged from your own unexamined self-deception are the ones that follow you from lifetime to lifetime until you finally turn around and look at them directly. Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius is giving you that opportunity right now. The question is, are you willing to look? Are you brave enough to see yourself clearly, without the filters of spiritual bypassing, or New Age platitudes, or the comforting stories that make you feel better about patterns you know need to change? Because here's what happens in 6 days on November 20th. And I need you to understand this so you can use the next 6 days wisely. Mercury reaches inferior conjunction, which means it passes directly between Earth and the Sun, and at that exact moment, the Scorpio new moon occurs at the 28th degree of Scorpio. The 28th degree of any sign is called the anaretic degree, the degree of fate and crisis and ultimate completion. When a new moon occurs at this degree in Scorpio, the sign of death and rebirth, the sign of shadow work and soul transformation, it creates a portal for the complete dissolution of old identity structures. Whatever Mercury has been exposing over these past 6 days, whatever you're recognizing today on November 14th, is going to die completely on November 20th. Not metaphorically die, not gradually fade away. Die, the old version of you that carried those illusions, that believed those lies, that participated in those dynamics. That version of you will not survive the Scorpio new moon at the anaretic degree during Mercury's inferior conjunction. And then, as if that weren't enough cosmic intensity for 1 week, Uranus goes to opposition on November 21st. Uranus, the planet of awakening and revolution and sudden unexpected change, reaches its maximum brightness and closest approach to Earth. This happens once a year, but this year it's happening the day after the Scorpio new moon, the day after Mercury's deepest retrograde point. Uranus is going to take whatever was exposed by Mercury, whatever died under the Scorpio new moon, and use that death as fuel for breakthrough and radical awakening. The person you become after November 21st will not be recognizable to the person you were on November 1st. That level of transformation is coming for you, whether you're consciously prepared for it or not. But, and this is why today matters so much, the degree of conscious awareness you bring to this transformation determines whether you experience it as a crisis that happens to you or as an awakening you participated in creating. The exposure phase of Mercury retrograde, which you're in right now, is giving you the information you need to consciously choose what dies and what gets reborn. If you're paying attention to what's being revealed, if you're taking inventory today of what Mercury has shown you over the past 6 days, if you're acknowledging the truth of what's unstable and unsustainable in your life, then you get to have a voice in the transformation process. You get to consciously release what needs to die, rather than having it ripped from your hands by cosmic force. But if you're still in denial, if you're still trying to put the broken pieces back together with spiritual duct tape, if you're still telling yourself that things will go back to normal once the retrograde is over, then the Scorpio new moon and the Uranus opposition are going to initiate you through crisis rather than through conscious choice. And trust me, beloved, you want to choose the conscious path. You want to be an active participant in your own transformation. The universe is going to transform you either way, but the journey is so much less traumatic when you're working with the cosmic currents instead of fighting against them. So let me ask you directly, and I want you to sit with this question even if it makes you uncomfortable. What has been exposed in your life since November 9th? Not what do you think should be different, not what you wish would change, but what has actually been revealed through the circumstances of the past 6 days. Where have communications broken down in ways that revealed underlying dishonesty or misalignment? What technology has failed at the exact moment when its failure showed you that you were depending on external systems instead of your own inner knowing? What plans got disrupted in ways that redirected you towards something more aligned with your soul's truth? Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius is asking you to examine your relationship to truth itself. Not truth as an abstract philosophical concept, but truth as a lived experience. Are you willing to live in truth even when truth is uncomfortable? Even when truth requires you to admit you were wrong about something you've been defending for years? Even when truth means disappointing people who expected you to stay the same forever? Even when truth costs you relationships and opportunities and versions of your future that looked good on paper but felt hollow in your bones? The Galactic Federation is watching this process with great care, because we understand something about your species that you're still learning. Your capacity for self-deception is matched only by your capacity for radical truth-telling once you finally decide to stop lying to yourselves. Humans can maintain elaborate illusions for decades, building entire lives on foundations of denial and wishful thinking. But when a human finally commits to truth, when they finally say, "I'm done with the comfortable lies, show me what's real even if it destroys me," that's when miracles become possible. That's when transformation happens at a speed that defies your own understanding of how change works. That's when you access the quantum field where reality itself becomes malleable to the force of your authentic intention. In 3 days, the Leonid meteor shower peaks, bringing lion codes of courage and sovereignty. Those codes will help you stand in the truth that Mercury has revealed. In 6 days, the Scorpio new moon creates the portal for death and rebirth at the deepest point of Mercury's retrograde cycle. That portal will complete the dissolution of old identity structures. In 7 days, Uranus opposition awakens you to revolutionary possibilities that aren't available to consciousness that's still clinging to the old paradigm. And in 14 days, Saturn goes direct, solidifying the new foundations you're building on the ground cleared by this entire transformation sequence. Then on November 29th, Mercury goes direct, and clarity returns, and you'll see with stunning obviousness why everything that fell apart needed to fall apart. But all of that, the Lion codes, the Scorpio portal, the Uranian awakening, the Saturn stabilization, the Mercury clarity, all of it depends on what you do right now with what's been exposed. The cosmic assistance is available, but cosmic assistance requires your conscious participation. The Federation can hold space for your transformation, can send frequencies to support your rewiring, can open portals to accelerate your evolution, but we cannot do the work of honest self-examination for you. That's your part. That's the human part of this cosmic dance between heaven and earth, between galactic consciousness and incarnated awareness. So when the intensity peaks, when you're standing in the ruins of everything that used to define you, when you can't remember who you were before Mercury started exposing your illusions, and you don't yet know who you're becoming on the other side of this transformation, remember that you chose this. Remember that your soul considered this lifetime, this exact moment, this specific initiation, to be worth the price of incarnating into the density of three-dimensional reality. Remember that the Galactic Federation is watching, that your star family is holding space, that you're never alone in this process even when every external structure you've been depending on has fallen away. If you need help navigating the intensity, when you're standing in the ruins of everything that used to define you, when Mercury has exposed your illusions and you can't remember who you were or see who you're becoming, Destiny Engine can reprogram your consciousness to remember that you chose this transformation. Your soul considered this exact initiation worth incarnating for. We've taken declassified consciousness technology and transformed it into a tool for navigating these cosmic initiations. Destiny Engine generates personalized sequences that help you stabilize through the intensity, remembering that the Galactic Federation is watching, your star family is holding space, and you're never alone, even when every external structure has fallen away. You can start with a $1 trial. The hardest thing you'll have to do is put on headphones, press play, and allow your consciousness to be reprogrammed to trust this dismantling process as the gateway to who you're becoming. This transformation is why you incarnated into three-dimensional reality. Get your Destiny Engine $1 trial now, before this initiation window closes. Link in the description. And when you emerge on the other side of November 29th, when Mercury stations direct, and the fog begins to clear, and you can finally see the path ahead with the clarity that comes after purification, you'll understand why this particular retrograde had to be so intense. You'll see that every exposure was necessary. You'll recognize that every disruption was redirecting you toward greater alignment with your soul's purpose. You'll know without question that what felt like loss was actually liberation, that what looked like endings were actually the clearing of space for new beginnings that couldn't emerge until the old structures were completely dismantled. The universe is not punishing you with this intensity. The universe is trusting you with this intensity. There's a difference, and that difference is everything. You're being given the gift of exposure because you're strong enough to handle the truth and wise enough to do something constructive with it. You're being initiated through conscious awareness rather than unconscious crisis, because your soul has earned the right to participate consciously in its own transformation. This is an honor, beloved, even when it doesn't feel like one. This is the fast track, the accelerated path, the hero's journey through the underworld that leads to resurrection and renewal. I am Seraphine, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, and I stand with you in this exposure, in this revelation, in this death that precedes every true birth. We see you, we honor your courage, we recognize the magnitude of what you're facing, and the grace with which you're facing it, even when you think you're barely holding yourself together. You're doing better than you know. The transformation is working exactly as it should. Trust the exposure. Trust the process. Trust yourself to handle whatever truth Mercury reveals, because you're far stronger than you've ever given yourself credit for. We love you. We're watching over you. And we'll be here on the other side of this initiation, ready to celebrate the version of you that emerges from the ashes of everything that had to burn.